When, at the beginning of the 21st century, the world of supercars was moving more and more toward extreme power, huge engines, and spectacular performance, a very different concept appeared. Quiet, thoughtful, and surprisingly mature. The Fioravanti F100R was not an attempt to create another speed monster, nor was it an answer to the Ferrari F50 or the McLaren F1. It was something more subtle, a vision of Ferrari's future created by a man who had helped shape the brand's DNA for decades. Leonardo Fioravanti, the designer of legends such as the Daytona and the 288 GTO, asked a simple but bold question. What should a future Ferrari look like if it truly focused on the driver, lightness, and pure driving pleasure? The answer was the F100 project, followed by its open version, the F100R, presented in the year 2000. Only 2 examples were built, both as prototypes. But even today, this car remains one of the most underrated and fascinating what-ifs in the history of Italian design. To understand what the F100R really was, we have to start with its creator. Leonardo Fioravanti is one of the most important designers in Ferrari history. Born in Italy in 1938, he studied mechanical engineering at the Politecnico di Milano, specializing in aerodynamics and body design. From the very beginning of his career, he had strong technical foundations, which he later combined with an extraordinary sense of form. In 1964, he joined the legendary Pininfarina studio, where he spent 24 years. It was there that his most famous designs were created: the Ferrari 365 GTB Ford Daytona, the 512 Berlinetta Boxer, and the 288 GTO. Fioravanti was not just a stylist. He was an engineer who understood how form affects function. In the 1980s, he became managing director of Pininfarina's Research and Development Division, and later also worked for the Fiat Group, including Ferrari. In 1987, Fioravanti made a bold move and founded his own design studio. At first, he worked in architecture, especially on the Japanese market, designing houses and commercial buildings. But his real passion remained the automobile. At the beginning of the 1990s, the Fioravanti company expanded into transport and industrial design. The studio began experimenting with new technical solutions, including roof systems and modern aerodynamics. Fioravanti did not want to copy existing trends. He wanted to move ahead of them, and it was in this context that the idea was born, to create his own vision of Ferrari's future, independent of Maranello's official strategy. The first step was the Fioravanti F100, presented in 1998. The car was created as a tribute to the 100th anniversary of Enzo Ferrari's birth. But it was not just a sentimental gesture. The F100 was meant to be a manifesto, a proposal for what Ferrari could become if it returned to its roots: lightness, precision, and focus on the driver. At a time when supercars were becoming heavier and more complicated, Fioravanti proposed the opposite: a more compact, more intuitive, and less overwhelming car. The project envisioned a mid-mounted V10 engine and a semi-automatic gearbox with steering wheel paddles, inspired by Formula One. 2 years later, in the year 2000, Fioravanti went a step further and presented the F100R, a roadster that developed the ideas of the original coupe. The car was shown at the Turin Motor Show and immediately attracted attention with its shape. It was low, wide, and extremely clean in its styling. It measured about 4 meters and 40 centimeters in length, 1 meter and 90 centimeters in width, and just 1 meter and 7 centimeters in height. But the F100RR was not simply an F100 without a roof. It was a carefully reinterpreted concept, focused on aerodynamics and comfort in an open body, which, despite appearances, is one of the greatest engineering challenges. The most distinctive element of the F100R was its windshield. Instead of a conventional solution, Fioravanti used what was called a multi-spherical windshield, made from 2 curved surfaces. Its purpose was not only to provide visibility, but above all, to control airflow. The air was directed over the passengers' heads and then reattached behind them, reducing turbulence inside the cabin. This made it possible to enjoy open-top driving without the usual aerodynamic chaos of a roadster. Behind the seats were special fairings, which served several functions at once: rollover protection, engine air intakes, and helmet storage compartments. The styling of the F100R developed the design language first shown on the coupe. One of the key themes was the so-called Ferrari wave, a line that began at the front of the car and flowed smoothly around the body. In Fioravanti's interpretation, it had a more dynamic, almost aggressive character, like the mark of a claw. The body was free of unnecessary decoration. Its surfaces were smooth, tense, and guided by function. At the rear, there was also an active spoiler with a variable angle of attack, which could increase downforce at high speed and also act as an aerodynamic brake. In terms of technology, the F100R was very advanced for its time. Instead of traditional side mirrors, it used cameras that sent the image to the cabin. The rear lights used neon technology, allowing for very thin and lightweight lighting elements. The wheels, developed in cooperation with Ferrari, were made from high-strength steel and designed using computer simulations, combining low weight with high strength. The entire project proved that Fioravanti treated the car as a complete system, where every element, from aerodynamics to ergonomics, mattered. The interior of the F100R continued the philosophy of minimalism and driver focus. Most functions were moved to the steering wheel, inspired by Formula One solutions. Instead of a traditional dashboard, the car used a simplified layout with digital analog instruments designed to provide only the most important information. The seats were designed to naturally guide the driver's legs toward the pedals, improving ergonomics and control. The whole cabin was intended to create an environment where the driver was not distracted, but fully focused on driving. As for the technical specifications, the F100R remained largely a concept. Project materials mentioned a planned mid-mounted V10 engine, but exact figures for power, torque, or performance were never officially confirmed. It is known that the design envisioned a Ferrari-inspired drivetrain and a paddle-shift gearbox behind the steering wheel. However, the car itself was a concept mock-up, so it did not have a fully functional powertrain. Even so, its proportions, technical ideas, and philosophy clearly showed that it could have become a real supercar. How many were built? In the case of the F100R, sources usually mention two examples, one red and one yellow. Both were prototypes, and at least one served as a show model. In practice, this means that the F100R is one of the rarest concept projects of its era. It never entered production, it had no official price, and it was never sold to customers. It was a pure vision, an experiment meant to show a direction, not to generate profit. How much could such a car be worth today? There is no clear answer. Because the F100R does not really exist on the collector market in the traditional sense, its value is purely hypothetical. However, considering the uniqueness of the project, the Fioravanti name, and the growing interest in prototypes from the 1990s and early 21st century, such a car could likely be worth from several million to even more than $10 million. In the collector world, what matters is not only the badge, but also the story, the context, and the uniqueness, and the F100R has all of those qualities. The Fioravanti F100R remains one of those projects that show an alternative path for automotive development. It was not the fastest, it was not the most extreme, but it was thoughtful, coherent, and extremely modern. At a time when supercars increasingly became demonstrations of technological force, the F100R reminds us that true innovation often begins with a simple question: what really matters to the driver? Perhaps that is why, even though it never reached the road, its meaning remains so strong. This is not just a prototype, it is a manifesto,